Welcome to the Empire One Show, where knowledge meets action. Yeah, we break down barriers to financial literacy. Speak truth to power, real conversations. Oh, voices that inspire change, challenging the status quo. Tools for building wealth, taking control. Your future starts right now. This is the Empire Winning Show. Empowerment starts now.
Hey, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for tuning in. Yes, this is the Empowerment Show today. I know generally we do politricking, but because it is Black History Month, we thought we'd switch it around a little bit. I'm going to start off, as usual, looking for something to be grateful for. In our lifetime, we don't have many, many great leaders. Unfortunately, we just lost one of them, Reverend Jesse Jackson. So here I am. I am going to take my hat off to that brother. And we'll have just a moment of silence. All right. So again, like I say thank you very much for tuning in to the Empowerment Show. Today, I'm going to have my brother along with me. Ashe, Mr. Ronald Yates. Generally, when he's on our show or when he's on this show, it's our show. And I love it when it's our show because he's the analyst who breaks things down. We may actually get an opportunity today to do just that. Again, we said it is Black History Month. To us, is Black History, period. 24/7, 365. Because without us, we'd have no light. Without us, we would not be able to sit here right here and communicate the way that we do. There are so many things that we as Black people across the diaspora of the world have contributed. Sciences, maths, chemistry, medicine, all of these things that we as Black people, and when I say Black people, I'm talking about the global majority, not just the African American and not just the African, but the global majority. We have contributed so much to society. And with that, I'm going to let my brother pick it up. Ashe, ashe, ashe.
Okay, brother. It's a pleasure to be with you again. And today we have a living griot. This brother I met, going back over 20 years ago. I was out in Southern California, in San Diego, and I was walking through a part of San Diego called Old Town. And I saw this sign for a little museum called, at the time, Casa del Rey Moro, or House of the Moorish King. And I always thought I knew Black history until I walked into this museum. And I think I was there for about 2 hours or so. And in that time, I learned just so much more that I did not know about the history of Black people on the African continent, throughout the diaspora. So it is my pleasure to bring on that griot, none other than Professor Charles Chuck Ambers. So Chuck, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. It's good to be here, and I'm glad that you're still as academic and active as you are.
Well, it was very enlightening to have the privilege to come into the studio and to have you out here in Pennsylvania on several occasions also teaching and lecturing. And today being Black History Month, or this being Black History Month, I felt it was important to bring you on to talk about this vital history, this history that is not just Black history, but it's world history. And I know that you can document 6,000 years of history of African people on the continent of Africa. So why don't we start there and talk a little bit about that?
Okay, good enough, good enough. I am in the historical Old Town where the first Spaniards landed, and a certain percentage of those Spaniards were of mixed African descent by way of the Moors, Islamic Moors from North Africa that invaded Spain in 711. And from 711 to the spring of 1492, over 750 years, you had people of mixed African descent controlling all of Spain, Portugal, parts of France, Germany, and Italy. And that's why Southern Europeans are quite often dark-skinned, curly hair, brown eyes, and earrings, because they are part African. And we do DNA on people with Dr. Henry Louis Yates, who comes on your public broadcasting station on Tuesday about 8 o'clock, and he's gotten $41 million in the last 26 years to do the DNA on Oprah Winfrey, Chris Rock, Morgan Freeman, and I work with them. And so we travel around the world on the internet, spiritually, to deal with the family of people of African descent around the world. I don't know where you want to start first.
Well, Chuck, how are you? I'm sorry, brother. It's all you. Chuck, I just need the last name.
It's like an amber light.
And I'm good.
Okay.
Go ahead, my brother. Thank you.
Yes.
So, Chuck, there's so much history that is hidden, right? And you enlightened me greatly in your museum. You know, you exposed me to Beethoven and his heritage, as well as the heritage of Alexander Pushkin and others. So let's talk a little bit about the origin of Beethoven and his teach as well, and also about Alexander Pushkin as well as Alexander Dumas.
Okay, I'll start with Dumas because he is so known around the world, but people don't know that he's of mixed African descent, about 25% African. His father was General Thomas Dumas, 50% African. Why? Because his father was a French plantation owner from France in Haiti, and he had a child by an African enslaved lady. And unlike the British, the French used to take their mixed children back to France and have them educated. So at 4.5 years old, Thomas Dumas goes back, General Thomas Dumas goes back to France and is educated in 2 generations of military families. And he becomes one of 12 generals of African descent in the French military during Napoleon's time, during George Washington's time in the late 1700s. He marries a European French lady, so his son, Alexander Dumas, is 25% African. And he is the one that is the most prolific writer in the history of the world. A lot of European Americans or Europeans want to talk about Shakespeare, but I want to talk about Alexander Dumas because the man made over $10 million in his own lifetime 200 years ago. And we all know about him because he wrote the whole series of the 3 Musketeers, The Man in the Iron Mask, and the book called The Black Count of Monte Cristo. But Hollywood and the Western scholars only told you about the Count of Monte Cristo. But his book is called The Black Count of Monte Cristo, putting it into perspective. And that's why we have fallen through the pages. So we need to open up some of these books and pages. I have over 7,000 books in 9 languages, because if you only speak one language, you really can't study nor teach the history of the world. And that's why there's no accident that the United States really only wants you to teach one language and speak one language. You can go through not 12 or 16 years of academic college and things here in the United States, and most curriculums only require you to function in one language, because they only want you to speak and understand English, because they don't want you to speak in French and Dutch and Spanish and talk to your African relatives around the world, because you got to get into all those languages, particularly even here in the Western Hemisphere, not just all over the world, but if you go into Mexico, Cuba, Brazil, Haiti, Venezuela, you got English, Dutch, French, Portuguese, Spanish to be able to negotiate with. And that's why the United States only teaches you in English. So this is part of where I'm in Old Town, where I have 6 to 7 million tourists that come to, speaking all languages. And so I'm right at home functioning with them and my 7,000 books in 9 languages. So I'll highlight Alexander Dumas, as I said, who made $10 million in his own lifetime 200 years ago. And we all are familiar with his books and the movies that Hollywood has made on the Count of Monte Cristo, but they didn't tell you the whole name of the book. The whole name of the book is called The Black Count of Monte Cristo, The Man in the Iron Mask, and The Three Musketeers. And many of we young men, at 11 and 12 years old, grew up with a broken broom handle trying to be the 4th Musketeer. And D'Artagnan took that away from us. And so the names you are familiar with that you don't know are mixed out from descent by this artist, poet, writer who earned $10 million 200 years ago. And so with that, we can talk about Dumas, but we can talk about Alexander Pushkin, so-called father of modern Russian literature. His grandfather was an Ethiopian prince, adopted by the Tsar of Russia, Peter the Great, and raised in Russia with all of that African history. And the leader of Russia, the Kremlin today, Putin, yes, Putin has just exposed to the world some of the history and things of the Africans that brought all of that history to Russia. Because you have things like the Count of Monte, Cinderella with her mean stepsisters, and a lot of the Russians have put all of his books and things to poetry and to artist pictures that you can buy and sell, that get bought and sold on the European market, and more valuable in places like Italy, France, Germany than they are in Russia. And so we talk about that. San Diego hosted about 25 years ago the Soviet Art Festival. And we had an opportunity, the African American community here in the United States, particularly through Hollywood and the history of Paul Robeson, who was a controversial person, but he followed so much of the Russian history that he exposed us to many of the Russians that are mixed African descent. Because during the you had a period of time in the late 1930s, mid 1930s to 1940s, that you had a situation where over 27 African American families went to Russia on a call by them because you had a situation in the world of the economic. You had a recession, depression, and Russia put out a call for agricultural specialists. And over 57 African African American families went to Russia and became part of their industry of doing the depression. And so we talk about some of them. We were able to host here in San Diego 5 Russians of African descent. One was a prima ballerina with the Bolshoi Ballet. One was an opera singer with the Moscow State Philharmonic. And one was a journalist, Yelena. And she brought her books and things with her, James and John Patterson, who Patterson had married a Russian woman and had 3 children. And so we talked about some of that history that came into San Diego with the Soviet Art Festival. And we were able to study with these 5 Soviets that came so that we can talk about all of this African history. I was lucky enough to be the broker of 24 of their limited edition graphics. And in order to get those graphics out of the Soviet Union, Russia, they have the USSR stamp on the back. I was a broker who sold 21 of the 24 graphics, and I was lucky enough to buy 3 of them, and they all have the USSR stamp on the back. And one is of Alexander Pushkin's fairy tale about Cinderella. And you should see the images of the 2 main stepsisters that Cinderella had. So we have quite a bit of documentation here in Russia, and parts of Southern Europe is only a part of it. We specialize, particularly being in San Diego right on the Mexican border, we specialize in African Latin history because of the 13 million Africans, that estimated 13 million Africans arrived into the Western Hemisphere during the enslavement period. Only 6% of them came into the United States. Over 90% of 13 million Africans are in Mexico, Cuba, Brazil, Haiti, Venezuela, speaking English, Dutch, French, Portuguese, Spanish. And that was part of my research in Mexico and then in Ecuador at the university studying on a doctorate program paid for by your tax dollars. Thank you for your tax dollars, because I studied with the GI Bill. I'm a vet from Vietnam, combat medic that was stationed at West Point, the United States Military Academy for the first year, and then at the 24th Evacuation Hospital in Benoit Air Base. And I got a year's paid vacation to Vietnam. And so with that, we had an opportunity to study into Mexico City at La Universidad de las Americas, and I transferred the doctorate program into Ecuador at the Catholic University in Ecuador. And during that sabbatical leave of 15 months from the school district that I taught, I was able to go to 13 different countries in Latin America, being able to be exposed to their English, Dutch, French, Portuguese, Spanish. And we ended up shipping back over 3,000 books. So that's what I did with this museum, with 3,000 books. But over the last 32 years, we've developed into about 7,000 books in 9 languages. And so that is part of the limited reason that many people here in the United States don't know about it, because they only function in 1 language, and that's no accident. And so we talk about some of this history that has fallen through the pages.
Chuck, I'd like you to talk about 2 things. One, a lot of people are really too familiar with how so many of us ended up in Brazil. And you told me about how that process began with the Spanish Inquisition. And then, if you can elaborate a little bit about the history of Beethoven.
Yes. Beethoven is from Bonn, Germany. And part of the part of southern Europe. The Moors controlled all of Spain, all of Portugal, parts of France, Italy, and Germany. And the part of Germany that they controlled was Bonn, Germany, where Beethoven comes from. So we talk about that. I have several books that we talk about in articles of him being of mixed African descent. And so this is part of the research that certain people have done, that we can give you names and books and things. So you talk about the history of J.A. Rogers and his travels and his research, traveling around the world to recognize and to find people of African descent. And J.A. Rogers has a book called The Five Negro Presidents. And so we talk about that. And the question is, how much African blood do they have to be called Negro or African? And we have, from that book, we have another book. And so I will try and give you a couple of names of books that you can look up. And so J.A. Rogers, almost anything written by J.A. Rogers, you can look up. But the one particular book that I'm talking about is The Five Negro Presidents. And then from his book, you have a female researcher, African American researcher, Dr. Saul Buckhampton. And she did a book called The Six Black Presidents. And so she found even one more than he did. And so we talk about that. And then I'm going to offer you a book written by the Klan, the Ku Klux Klan here in the United States. And that book is called One Drop of Blood, The American Misadventure of Race, by Scott Malcolm. And his book is about one drop of blood. They're saying that if you have one drop of African blood, you are a Negro, African, Black, colored, whatever the common vernacular is. And so that is part of what we deal with in the book display and things that I have on display that's part of the exhibits here in the United States room, in the Latin America room, and in the Africa room. And so you have a few books that your listeners can look up and try and find so that they can verify what we're saying, not only in English, but in other languages too. So I would like to move from that. I don't know where you want to go from now. Talk to me. What would you like?
Well,
I would like to talk about some of the ancient Egyptians, because I have a collection of 55 photos, not line drawings, but photos of statues, carvings, and mummies of my 3 trips to ancient Egypt. And with Dr. Asa Hilliard, ancestor Jake Carruthers from the Kinetic Institute in Chicago, Dr. Lynn and Ronson Jeffers from the City College of New York, Dr. Wade Nobles from San Francisco, and this is all a part of some of those Aztec scholars, the Association for the Study of African Classic History.
So, Doctor, I don't mean to interrupt, but we my buddy and I earlier today, we decided to have a little fun, right? And we made this little gentleman's bet. So this was a gentleman's bet about a particular author. His name is Achumbe. Does that sound familiar to you?
Chinua Achebe.
Ah, thank you very much. Thank you very much. Thank you, Ron. Wait, where's my cup? Where's my cup? Okay, there you go. I got my cup. He is a hell of a writer, is he not?
Yes, and his books are required in certain of the African studies, not only in the United States, but as I travel into other countries. His books, it's unfortunate his books are not translated into many languages, but you can still, Things Fall Apart, Chinua Achebe is a classic.
Yeah, I read that one, When Things Fall Apart. That was a hell of a book. I like the way that he was able to take African history, if you want to say, and kind of unwhitewash it and try to give it to you in a truthful way. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Well, see, now that is part of what you get outside of the United States. And one of the things that I was sharing with your listeners is do whatever they can to get out of the United States. It's one thing to deal with this Negro, colored, black, African American history in the United States.
Mm-hmm.
But if you take your American Express card and get out of the United States, you'll see how you are treated around the world. Because as long as you're in the United States, some are always going to consider you an ex-slave, enslaved person. And you're going to be discriminated against. Not to say that when you go out of the United States, but when you go out of the United States flashing your Visa, MasterCard, and especially the American Express card, you are treated like a full citizen in many countries. Although certain countries also still have a little colonial over when you go into Latin America, you still have the British and the Dutch and the French and the Portuguese and the Spanish influences, but they are normally much more accepting because they are part African.
Right.
That's why I'm trying to get Henry Louis Gates to go into these Latin countries. We had a conference at Cambridge, at Rutgers, at Harvard University a few years back, where we have 53 scholars from 12 Latin American countries speaking English, Dutch, French, Portuguese, Spanish. And we brought out all of that African history that's down in there. Yes. Hold on. Where do you want it to go from now?
So what I want to do, I'm sorry, Ron, you can have it in a second. So we getting ready to go on. We have to have a little break right quick in a minute or two. But I wanted to ask you, what do you think about what's going on now in Burkina Faso in Africa, what we call Africa, Al-Kibalan, but what we call Africa now. In Burkina Faso with Mr. Ire Trahim. Ibrahim Trahim. But I'm going to ask you that. We got to take a little quick break. And then when we come back on this side of the break, right, we're going to take a quick little commercial break. Right, as soon as we come back, you can go ahead and pick that up for me, and then Ron is going to pick up from there. Okay? Okay. Just hold on, sir.
A doctor's calling. A company's mission. United for a greater good. When Edmark International, the pioneers of wellness, joined forces with Dr. LaJoyce Brookshire, naturopath, the world gained a new weapon in the fight for true health. Co-created, science-backed, nature-powered. This isn't just a product. This is a movement. Born from decades of groundbreaking research, naturopathic mastery, and Edmark's relentless innovation.
The body wants to heal itself, and we have just given it the ultimate toolkit.
A detox unlike any other. A partnership unlike any other. The future of health starts now.
All right, welcome back. Thank you guys for tuning in to the Empowerment Show. My name is Kendall Stevenson, along with my host, Ronald Yates. He's usually the analyst. Today, we're on the phone with a young man named Professor Chuck Ambers. And Chuck, you were asked a question just prior to us going on our little break. The question was about Burkina Faso in Africa. And the question was what did you think about what was going on there as far as them trying to reach and strive for some sort of independence?
Since 1885, with the Berlin Conference that was held, you had 8 or 9 European countries sat down and systematically divided the African continent. And not one African is sitting at the table. That is where you have the result of the colonial control of Africa, and the various countries in Africa are starting to unshackle and become independent of that colonial financial struggle with the gold, with the diamonds, and the Gold Coast, with the Arctic Coast, with the diamonds in South Africa, and the gold in South Africa, going all the way back to the academics of sealing the history in ancient Egypt and having the colonial period, making movies like The Ten Commandments with Charleston Heston and Yul Brynner and later Liz Taylor. And now we can put faces on these people, and they're African people, African faces. And so what you're dealing with, and I'm going to have to sidestep your question somewhat because I don't deal as much contemporary with what's happening on the African continent, because you have so much happening from north, south, east, west Africa with some 52, 53 different countries that you in different languages that you can't keep up with. And so just know that what you're talking about Burkina Faso, that is only the latest of the Africans unshackling from this colonial control of finances. And they always came in, the Europeans came into various countries, not just the African continent, but around the world, in India and things like that. You just had the Queen of England to die a year or so ago. And they took 2 weeks to show you all the crowns and jewels and emeralds that the British crown had stolen around the world. And you have these countries asking for their treasures back. And you have geographic will tell you now that you have many of those treasures that are going back to the source, to India, to Latin America, that were stolen. And so this is just, Burkina Faso is just part of a very small one nation that is unshackling at their own ability.
Well, I'm sure that Ron can tell you, as he educated me, that this is not the first time that as the Africans or people of the African diaspora has been reaching out for their independence. I mean, he introduced me to Omar Gaddafi and the other brothers that have tried to independ. I only use the Burkina Faso because I understand that's the latest. This is what's happening right now. That's why I utilize that. But Ron did have a question that he wanted to ask you, so I kind of want to bring him in so he can ask the question.
Yes, sir.
So Chuck,
one too many times. I'm 83 years old.
And someone is 84, and that person that's 84 is older than you, young man.
There you go. So that's a part of it. But go right ahead, Ron. What's your question?
so since we're on the African continent, why don't we talk about the current country called Zimbabwe? Prior to that, it was known by a different name. So let's talk about the name prior to the name being changed to Zimbabwe and what happened. And then let's go and talk about how many Africans, because there are more Africans in Brazil than in America, and how they got there, and how this triangular slave trade actually began. Chuck? Kendall, did we lose Chuck? Kendall, can you hear me? Kendall, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. I got you, brother. Sorry about that, man. We had a little technical difficulty. Okay, so he's back. Everybody's back. You're back.
Okay.
I'm black. He's black. He's black. So we're all blackity black.
Okay, good. And we were talking about Zimbabwe.
Yes.
Things that happened with Zimbabwe, Robert Mugabe and all, you had a situation that some of their historical art has become world famous now. The Great Wall of Zimbabwe going back some 1,800 years. A stone wall 40 feet tall, 12 feet thick, and you have stones as big as your SUV. And they built this wall 1,800 years ago using engineering and architecture for sex. And the world is just finding out about the engineering, but they're looking at it in the art of green serpentine and brown rococo. Some of these statues that are being carved and on the market around the world. If you fly to Atlanta, the international reception airport at Atlanta, you have about 17 different life-size stones that are the fourth, fifth, sixth hardest rock in the world. Green serpentine, brown rococo, verdite. And these stones have become sought after in the art world around the world. We had people here in San Diego coming to the San Diego History Center trying to get African Americans in the community to become familiar with the rocks and the stones and the carvings of Great Zimbabwe, the second largest structure on the African continent behind the pyramids. It's the Great Walls of Zimbabwe that were fortresses with stones as big as your SUV. And now these pieces are being sold on the international market because they're statues, much like the bronze from Ife, Benin, and Cameroon. Well, from the country of Zimbabwe, you've had this enormous structure, the second largest structure on the African continent behind the pyramids. And it is now, the stones from that fortress is now being polished and sold around the world. And if you look at the stones from Zimbabwe, the Shona, S-H-O-N-A, you can find some of the artistic things that are happening on the African continent that are coming around the world. Although it's coming around the world in the hands of the colonial control, they're bringing some of this African art in different ways, just like what you saw with the movie Shaka Zulu from South Africa, when Nelson Mandela and some of the freedom fighters from there ended up flexing their muscles and not letting colonial power control there. And so you have some of this that's happening in different ways, but it's coming off the African continent into the rest of the world, not just politically and not just militarily, but from the independence of them being able to promote products around the world. So that's part of what's happening in parts of the African continent. Burkina Faso, it happened 20, 30 years ago when Kenya and was getting its independence, when you had the African leaders that became very popular around the world, but it's not always in a positive way because it reflects on the economic control that the European powers have. So, I'll just take a good example. Teddy Roosevelt, President of the United States, at the turn of the 1900s, he went to Africa and started the big game hunting of 5 big game animals. And now those 5 big game animals are on an endangered list, with the elephants, with the rhinos, with their horns, and the buffalo, water buffaloes, and things like that. So you have unshackling at different stages, from political, from militarily, but more than anything else, it's always been a financial control that you've had, that the European world has come on the African continent with their gun in one hand, many times their religion in the other hand. They give the religion to the local people, and with the empty hand that they gave away the religion, They take the diamonds, they take the gold, they take the ivory, they take the skins and everything, and it's all just a financial situation. Just
Well, Chuck, that's what I wanted to highlight.
That's what I wanted to highlight.
I wanted to talk about how Zimbabwe in particular was once called Rhodesia. How did that happen?
Rhodesia. Yes. Uh-huh. And so I started studying about the African continent when the Africans started changing the names from, like you hear Victoria Falls, very famous, but it was called originally Masiotunya, thunder that roared. And this is the biggest waterfall, one of the most powerful waterfalls in the whole world. People know it as, yes, by its European name of Victoria Falls, but they're going back. That's what Robert Mugabe did in trying to bring the African control back into his country. He changed the name from Lake Victoria and Victoria Falls to Masiotunya, what it was called before it was called Victoria Falls by the colonial powers. The same thing with Kilimanjaro and with Lake Victoria and all of those coming from Kenya. You have the beginning of the Nile River that starts at the bottom of the Mount Kenya, Mount Kilimanjaro, and it goes and flows north into the Mediterranean. It's what you know of as the Nile River. And you have the Blue Nile from Ethiopia. The White Nile meets with the Blue Nile, and it goes into the Mediterranean. But that all along that whole river system of the Nile River, you have a whole collection of African countries that live off of that. But people don't know about that. Some of the first people to sail in the history of the world, 5,200 years ago, were people of the Nile River. And that is part of it. I'm from San Diego, a nautical city of sailing, but you don't say sailing here in San Diego because we have so much Navy. Sailing in San Diego means the Navy, and the Navy has metal ships, yes, and so we say yachting. And so I learned to sail on the Nile River in the Folofos that they've had with flat bottom boats for 5,000 years. And so that's part of the history and the science of sailing that we have. And so you have all of this history, rich history that you can look at from the 5 big game animals. You have a big thing about elephants being on the endangered list. Barack Obama signed an executive order that you can't bring ivory into the United States. He says only elephants should wear ivory. And that's because the ex-president of the United States, Theodore Roosevelt, during the turn of the 1900s, made big game honey very popular. And now, Theodore Roosevelt came back to the United States and he couldn't even save the buffalo that's here in the United States. We used to have buffalo in herds as big as the elephant herds on the African continent. And so you talk about the economics of what happened to the buffalo here in the United States with all of the buffalo, things like that you have. And so it all boils down to the colonial control of economics. You have the same thing that happened in the South Pacific. You have a very popular movie called Mutiny on the Bounty. The Bounty was a ship, an English ship that went to the South Pacific to collect fruit. Is a product that the British in the Caribbean needed cheap food to feed the enslaved people in the British colonies of Jamaica, Trinidad, Barbados, and all. That's what Mutiny on the Bounty was all about. This ship went to the South Pacific to get live plants, breadfruit, to bring it back to the Caribbean to grow it so that they could make mix the breadfruit with the beans, Boston baked beans, and you get Boston baked beans. You get a can of Boston baked beans, and it used to have a little bake in it, but you don't have. But they take the molasses from the sugar plantations, the biggest cash crop in the Western Hemisphere. Cotton was the biggest cash crop in the United States, but sugar was the biggest cash crop in the Western Hemisphere. And from the sugar canes, they made molasses, they made onions. They needed a food source to feed the enslaved people. And what did they use? They went to the South Pacific and got this plant called breadfruit that they could make, and that's where they grew the sugar cane, and they took the molasses and they mixed it with the baked beans, and now you have a very famous can of beans called the Boston baked beans. But how often do you see any bacon in that can? You might see a thumbnail of bacon and a whole can of Boston baked beans, but they made the Boston baked beans as a commodity to feed the enslaved people, a cheap mode of food for that. And so you had this triangular trade from the Caribbean to England to Africa, from Africa to the Caribbean. It's called a triangular trade. What was that about? The enslaved people from Africa brought them into the Americas as enslaved to be the labor to grow cotton, tobacco, and things like that. They went to the European markets to be refined, made money for them in England and France and Germany. And then the money was put into ships that went back to the African continent. And they took the guns back to the African continent to sell to the trade to the Africans. And some of them to
What's the matter? Yeah.
That's just what they call the triangular trade. So we talk about the economics that is still running the continent by the European slaves. And I have to say one thing about the academics. The word slave has nothing to do, the etymology of the word slave has nothing to do with the African continent. The word slave, the etymology of the word slaves comes from Slavic, Czechoslovakians, Yugoslavians, because the Romans and the Greeks enslaved the Czechoslovakians and Yugoslavians. So when you say the word slave, people think about Africans. But it has nothing to do with Africans. That's one of the first assignments that I give to my college students, is to look up the etymology of the word slave. And it refers back to Rome and Greece and the Europeans who enslaved one another before they ever got to the African continent. So we talk about this history and where this history comes from, and how you need to get out of the United States to go and travel to find your relatives around the world.
Well, you know, we came up with something, Doctor. I don't mean to cut it to you. Ron and I, we were sitting around and we were discussing the whole thing about education at one time. And we both agree that we cannot allow school to get in the way of our education. So with that kind of being said, is that I know it's a little funny there, but the education that we've been receiving here in America has kind of been a little inadequate and not actually sufficient as far as African American, Black American, or even if we were to talk about, let's say, the original name of Africa, which is not Africa, Alkebulan, right? Alkebulan, and if I like to start off history about there. I know a lot of people like to come out and they like to start history from, let's say, slavery, and we could talk about the things that took place in slavery. But like when I first came on and I talked to you, I said I like to make sure that we are known as the global majority. So we open up our world, and our world to us would start in Alkebulan. The Moors, the Nubians, and so forth and so on. We all started in Alkebulan. So,
Well, we can talk about many of the Nubians. That's why so many African American charter schools, where the African Americans here in the United States are not pleased with the educational system. And when we have an opportunity to start a charter school, to rewrite our own curriculum and things like that, in Oakland, California, Dr. Wade Nobles went on because Oakland, California had the lowest test scores in the state of California. And through ASCAP, some of these African scholars, we started an African-centric curriculum up there to change the world. I worked for 30 years in the elementary program as an African-American male in the 4th, 5th, and 6th graders. So I worked for my first 30 years of teaching was in an elementary program before I was asked to join the community colleges here in California, because they were starting to have an African-centric, black, Negro, colored, whatever you want to call it. They were starting to have a curriculum that needed to be infused. But we started in an elementary program so that you could come up to the first 6 years, 7, 8 years, junior high, into before you get into college. They started at the wrong end of the educational system in the university, because many African Americans never made it to the university. That's why I stayed in the elementary program, because those first 6 or 7 years laid the foundation for you to go to junior high and eventually into high school and into college. So those are the most critical years that you could start, and that's why I stayed in elementary. And then I was asked to gradually go into the junior college program and into the college program. And that's why I went internationally, not only here in the United States in the elementary program, but Latin America, because many Africans in Latin America and around the world do not get into the college system. So to have an academic program in the college system only, it starts at the wrong end of college. The educational system, you need to start with the primary grades. And that's why just a basic education for the basic 6 to 8 grades, many people outside the United States don't go above that. My mom and father never finished high school.
Well, I can attest to some of that about the education system here. You know, it's funny that here we got a little joke about Americans here. We say, so if you speak 3 languages, of course you're trilingual, and if you speak 2 languages, then of course you're bilingual. But if you only speak 1 language, then 9 out of 10 you're an American, because only Americans only speak 1 language, pretty much basic 1 language. And this is why when I say to you that the education system here in America is somewhat inadequate, it's a little arrogant the way it's taught. They teach a lot of European history or a lot of what they consider to be American history. And they leave out a lot of things in it. They cherry pick what they want to put and what they want us to learn. A lot of it is to control. We understand that it's a way to have us to emulate into their society and their culture. So now, with that being said, Doctor, we're almost about at the end of our show. And we only do this for an hour or so. So we're just about at that hour point. And I think Ron has got some, he's going to take it away. And I think he's sitting there. Look at that. He looks so handsome. Smile for the people.
Hello, everyone. Hello, everyone.
It's great when you got people looking and watching, and I can see it. It's all good. So as I was stating, Ron is probably going to take it away and take us out. And I'm going to say thank you again for coming on, Doctor. I really, really do appreciate you coming on. Hopefully you will come back. That would be something, and we can get into a part 2, and then we can get into a part 2 about maybe which direction, with all the knowledge and everything that you've accumulated over the years, maybe you can be an elder and point us in some sort of direction as to which way we should be going as a people. What do you think about that?
Ron has some counting me from time to time, but I just love to see that the direction that you folks are interested in growth. said, I spent only 5 hours in England, and I spent that, well, I don't spend any money. I've learned so much about European history and civilizations that I can't unshackle from it. And that's why I devoted the rest of my life to finding my own African family all around the world, not just on the African continent. Because you know, to South Pacific, Fiji, Papua New Guinea, Vanuatu, those are African people also. And so we need to share that and travel the world and find out who you are. Okay.
Global majority. Global majority. Global majority. Ron, I saw you, babe.
Well, sorry, a couple of things that we didn't get to touch on tonight. And hopefully in part two, we'll get to touch on those things. Now, what we're going to talk about as it relates to Zimbabwe was the fact that that country was once named after a gentleman by the name of Cecil Rhodes. And what he did once he came to Africa, and how he controlled that entire country, and how the effects are still being felt to this day, and how now, after all of the resources taken out of Africa, we now have the Rhodes Scholarship. And another thing we can talk about in part two, if we're allowed, is the fact that there are more Africans in Brazil than in the United States. And how they got there in 1492 with the start of Spanish Inquisition. Many of the Jews that were run out of Spain went down to Brazil and started the sugarcane industry and started the importations of Africans in the 15th century. So maybe in our next segment with Adrio, we can get more into that. But Chuck, it is always a pleasure to just sit and listen to you and learn so much from you over the years. It has been my pleasure to be a student of yours. And I'm so grateful that you were able to come on and spend some time with us today.
Since you mentioned Brazil, your audience needs to know that Brazil has the second largest African population in the whole Western Hemisphere. Okay?
All right, Doctor.
The second largest population on the African continent. It has more Africans than Nigeria does.
All right, Doctor. Again, thank you guys for tuning in. Ron, you are always the man. Thank you for bringing this gentleman on. We had an opportunity to talk to an elder before transition. How about that? We got an opportunity to actually learn something from an elder before transition. I gotta love that. We have to say ashe, because that's if people want to say a blessing, I consider that something blessing for me, because I'm getting to the point where people look at me and I'm an elder. So people ask me questions and they want to know things. And it's great that I still have someone around like yourself I can learn some more from, so I can continue to be an all learner.
We all are standing on the shoulders of so many. I'm standing on the shoulders of so many scholars. And I just keep regurgitating some of what I have learned. I still call myself, like John Henry Clark always called himself, just an elementary school teacher. And it's part of it, because we need to just teach the basics of what we've done around the world. And I do mean around the world, and get out of the United States and travel and spend some of your money around the world.
Well, I tell you, one of the things that we didn't get to, and we like I said, the clock is ticking, but I didn't get an opportunity to get any of the listings of the books that you have written. So we do have a web page here, and it's at thepaempowermentnetwork.com. And whatever, if you get a chance and you want to let Ron send him a couple of the books that you've written or what you think that we should read, I have a spot that's on there on that particular webpage for recommended book reading. So I would love to post some of your books up there as well.
Yes, the one book that I would ask you to start with The African Roots of Mathematics. And that is by, it's from Deborah Mayat Moore. She calls herself Mayat. She's from Detroit. She's a mathematician. And the African Roots of Math, that is part of what you saw the movie Hidden Figures. The black calculators that put John Glenn in the orbit. That movie should have come out 51 years ago.
All right, Doctor, I'm going to cut you short because we can't give away too much. You know, if you give away too much milk, nobody will buy the cow. So we still need people to buy the cow. So we're going to pick it up on a part 2. I'm going to say thank you again, and I truly appreciate you coming in. I'm sure Ron feels exactly the same way, and I'm grateful to have Ron on the network. So here we go.
Thank you, brother. Thank you, brother. Thank you.
The language of the elders, Shem Hotep.
Shem Hotep. Ashe, brother. Shem Hotep. And you have a pleasant day, and we'll wrap to you later. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Chuck. Thank you, Chuck.
All right, Ron, we're gonna let's see, we're gonna kick it off. We're gonna get out of here. We're gonna come back. I still need to do a political show, so sometime this week we can pick it up. Whenever we pick it up because recently what was it, 1,200 people are missing. They can't find 1,200 people that have been incarcerated by ICE. Not only they can't find them, they can't find any of their paperwork as well. So it sounds like something's going on. Maybe they're being shipped off into some slave camps or something like that. Who knows? But it's something that we could discuss and talk about the next time. All right, brother?
Sounds good, brother. Sounds good, brother.
Always good to have you here. Peace.
Okay.
Yeah.
Peace.